advocacy through the lens of who are we trying to get involved as stakeholders in advocacy. And for a college, it's students, it's faculty, staff, alumni, community partners, elected officials, media, and donors. And your list may look a little bit different from this, but I think whenever we think about advocacy, it's important to think about who can we get engaged. And what we're excited about as a college is trying to figure out how we experiment. How can we use advocacy and get all of our college stakeholders involved? That is a unique perch that a lot of higher education institutions have not been willing to take on in the past. We believe that it's important to have ideas, right? We have solutions that we want to see happen in our community, but in order to do that, we have to take action for change. And part of action is advocacy. So why do it? I'll tell you why we're doing it, and I'll also share why I did it when I was a small nonprofit organization leader. I not only work at Emerson College, but in the past I've run small community-based or advocacy nonprofits with like 3 or 4 people. Whether I was running a small organization or even at Emerson, what I can tell you is this is the fastest way for impact. If we want to make big-scale impact, legislative and budgetary and voter advocacy is critical because, as you all know, this work is great. You can do it one person at a time. But when you get a law passed, when you get a budget passed that has resources for arts and for our community, you can have huge-scale impact that will affect thousands of individuals, families, towns, neighborhoods, communities in one fall swoop. And to me, that's important because we have such limited resources. If we can build power and use that for advocacy impact and see change that way, we should do it. So if we're looking for big-scale impact, which I know all of us are, then I think we've got to put our time and attention and our feet into advocacy. It's also a way to empower our constituencies. It's a way to build agency and influence for our stakeholders who may be trying to find a way to have a voice around issues that impact their lives. There's nothing better than working on an advocacy campaign and winning and seeing those results of that policy affect you directly. And it's a way to build community. It's a way to have your stakeholders engaged in a conversation, engaged in advocacy, engaged in a mutual, exciting experience where you can see a win. And also, it builds collaboration. I mean, as Mass Creative is a great example, when we join advocacy coalitions, we partner with others, and we win. And not only do we win on advocacy, but it builds partnerships and relationships that we can use for other kinds of activities that we want to do. So that's why we do it. How we advocate is in 2 ways. We do legislative and budget advocacy here at the Alma Lewis Center, and we also do voter engagement. So we have action alerts that we do electronically that inform our stakeholders how to take action. So we recently did one around gun violence, for example. We had Emerson weigh in on how to advocate for gun reform legislation. That's the first time we've ever done that, and people responded. We can certainly and will do that on arts in the future. We use social media to get our constituency involved, and we do a lot of sign-on letters where our center and other academics and other college presidents will develop letters that we present to the legislature on different issues. And we do a lot of coalition building. We're a member of Mass Creative. We're a member of other coalitions that do joint advocacy together. Around voter engagement, we also think this is important, that in order to do effective legislative and budget advocacy, you need to have your stakeholders engaged in voting, right? They need to have that political power, that lever to say that we are voters and we are going to vote consistently in every election for arts, for our community, their address, we re-register them, and we educate them about what the candidates' positions are. And then more importantly, we get them to turn out. We do calls, we do alerts, we do social media, person-to-person contact to say, you need to get to the poll. Here's how you do it. This is when it's open. Did you vote? Let us know. Click this and take a poll. We're not interested in who they vote for, but we want them to be educated. We want them to understand what it means to be an arts voter. So in a nutshell, that's why we've been engaged in sort of how we've done it, and it's really made us effective. We believe that we're making an impact being a part of the arts community around advocacy. We feel like our stakeholders feel empowered. They feel like a sense of, wow, we can make a difference, and we're seeing things change. And it allows us to make impact on our core mission, and that's really key. And it helps us, frankly, build power as an arts community. And we're in a different place because we have all decided that we are going to try to be advocates together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. That was great, and thanks for all your work at Emerson and engaging the community in this great work for the arts community. Now I want to turn it over to Isaiah from the Alliance for Justice, who's a legal expert who's going to give us the overview of your ability to advocate and the do's and don'ts of engaging in electoral campaigns. Thanks, Isaiah, for helping all of us here in Massachusetts with this issue.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. As Matt said, I'm Isaiah Castilla. I'm counsel at Alliance for Justice. Just a brief introduction to Alliance for Justice. We are an organization, our Boulder Advocacy Initiative works with nonprofits here in D.C. and across the country on improving and strengthening their advocacy capacity and also trying to make sure that they understand the legal rules around protecting their tax-exempt status while engaging in that advocacy. We do that in a number of ways, through trainings like this one today, through technical assistance. You can call us pretty much any time, and we have a lawyer on call to take your questions to help kind of walk you through the rules of lobbying, the rules of elections, funding advocacy, and the like. And then you can go to our website, Boulder, B-O-L-D-E-R, advocacy.org, and download and access a number of resources to help you help others. So today I'm going to talk about lobbying and elections. We've got a limited amount of time, so if I move too fast, feel free to call me or email me at the end of today's presentation. And if you have questions, just type them in the chat box. I'll try to get to those questions. So today we'll talk about a little bit about lobbying and a lot about elections. And first, let me say I'm very happy to be here. It's so great to know that arts organizations in Massachusetts are really out there advocating and being active in elections. As someone who was a music major and really values the arts, this is great. This is great stuff. So I work at a public charity, Alliance for Justice. It's a 501c3 organization. As you see on the screen, C3s are the most common form of charitable or tax-exempt organization. Over 1.2 million of these groups in the United States. And most organizations, tax-exempt organizations, choose to be under the 501c3 tax status because of their tax treatment. Contributions to C3s are tax-deductible. In addition to that, they are a preferred recipient of private foundation grants. Okay? Also, now with those advantages come some limitations, and the first limitation is on a C3's lobbying. So I won't get into lobbying too much today, but C3s can indeed lobby. You can lobby, your local or federal or state legislatures. But with that in mind, there are some limitations on how much you can do. And if you have questions about that, you can call me after today's talk. And finally, there's an absolute prohibition on supporting or opposing candidates for public office. As public charities, you cannot endorse candidates. You cannot contribute to candidates on behalf of your organization. There are things, as a citizen, you can do whatever you would like, but in your capacity as an employee or volunteer for your organization, you can't support or oppose candidates for public office. Okay? Here in the second column, in the second column we have 501c4 social welfare organizations. These are organizations that are charged with improving the general welfare of a community. These are groups like NARAL, Pro-Choice America, America Votes, Human Rights Campaign, Sierra Club, League, Conservation Voters. All tax-exempt organizations, however, contributions are not tax-deductible, and private foundations have to exercise expenditure responsibility when they make grants to C4s, so they prefer to just make those grants to C3s. They're starting to see that trend kind of change, but that's just the way it is right now. Lobbying activities for C4s are unlimited, so they can lobby to an unlimited extent. And then in addition to that, as a secondary activity, C4s can support or oppose candidates for public office. And then that last column is just political organizations. Sole purpose is supporting candidates. They don't lobby. That's it. Okay. So this is just good to know as you work. As you seek to create systemic change, work with and work on a number of issues. I'm sure, especially as it relates to funding for the arts. A lot of times we end up working with different types of groups, and it's just important to know what you can do and what you can't do when you engage in that activity. So, many avenues of advocacy. As you know, lobbying is not the only form of advocacy. It comes with some limitations, but it is a very strong form of advocacy if you are a public charity. And then there are a variety of other activities that you can engage in, from public education to regulatory efforts that aren't lobbying, at least federally. And so today, again, I'm going to talk about the federal rules, so that the Internal Revenue Code and Treasury regulation, how it relates to your C3 status, how do you protect your tax-exempt status, and the like. That's what we're talking about today. So keep in mind that there are some state rules. There are rules that you have to keep in mind on the local level as far as disclosure. It doesn't limit how much lobbying you can do, but it just requires that you tell them, what type of advocacy, tell the right agency, hey, we're doing this type of work, or this is how much we spent. It doesn't limit what you can do. They just want to know what you're doing and how much you're spending. Okay? So under the Internal Revenue Code, there are definitions for lobbying. Those are definitions under what we call the 501H election or expenditure test. That's a way that you measure your lobbying when you report it on your Form 990 at the end of your fiscal year. Now, there are two ways to measure your lobbying. One is what we call the insubstantial part test. We don't really have time to dig deep into the insubstantial part test and the 501H election expenditure test. If you have questions about it, I encourage you to call me because there are two separate ways to measure our lobbying, and we often encourage groups to make what we call the 501H election, but we don't really have time to talk about it. But these definitions are what you need to know, okay? Direct lobbying is a communication to a legislator that expresses a view about specific legislation. A communication, that's simple enough: phone call, tweet, Facebook post, email, face-to-face meeting. Legislators, these are federal members of Congress. These are their state legislatures, local, the city council or county board of supervisors. So these are the folks that we consider legislators. They are legislative bodies. But the IRS definition sometimes participate in the formulation of legislation. So what I like to say is when we ask an executive official to step into the shoes of a legislator, that executive then becomes a legislator. So it would be lobbying if you ask Governor Patrick to please sign a bill or the budget where increasing funding for arts organizations. Okay, so that's lobbying. You need to track it and report that as lobbying to the IRS. Okay. And express a view about specific, and these folks aren't legislators. School boards, planning commissions, zoning commissions, water districts. Under the IRS rules, these people are not, or these boards, these special purpose boards are not considered to be legislative bodies. So you wouldn't have to worry about your tax-exempt status being in jeopardy or your lobbying limit being compromised if you advocate in front of these boards. Ballot measures are considered to be specific legislation, and these are legislators. The general public are members of legislators. So your advocacy to these to the people to get them to vote for or against a ballot measure is lobbying. So that has to be tracked and reported to the IRS as a lobbying expenditure. Okay, this is something important to know. Specific legislation. This is anything with a bill number, anything with a name, model legislation that you may pull from another state or that you create yourself. That is specific legislation. So all of these elements have to occur. Budgets, appropriations bills, taxes are considered to be specific legislation. So any communication to a legislator expressing a view about specific legislation, all these elements that we've talked about, that equals direct lobbying. And you have to track and record those expenditures as lobbying. Let's see. And under the Internal Revenue Code, regulations, executive orders, trying to change the enforcement of existing laws, litigation, all of it not legislation. This is not legislation, so you wouldn't have to track and report that as lobbying. Now, grassroots lobbying is a communication to a legislator that expresses a view about specific legislation through a call to action. A call to action is very narrowly defined by the IRS. It's telling the general public to contact their legislator, providing contact information where the general public can contact legislators, providing a mechanism to view about specific legislation with one of these four methods or a combination of the four. That's a grassroots lobbying communication and will count against your grassroots lobbying limit. Here's a grassroots lobbying communication. As you see, it says call Congress, call your respective House members, senators and House members. Here's another example. So someone asks the question, when you send an email encouraging a vote on legislation, do we have to count that? And how if you get in touch with me after, we can kind of talk through that, Joe. We can talk more deeply about that. But just for the sake of time, yes, you do have to count that as grassroots lobbying. If you're encouraging, well, it just depends on how it's done. And we can talk more about that. So when you send one of these grassroots lobbying communications only to your membership, that's direct lobbying. When it goes to the general public, that's grassroots lobbying, okay? And it counts against your grassroots lobbying limit. And then finally here we have an example of just listing those legislators. As you see, they're voting on a Ninth Circuit nomination to the federal courts. Nominations that require the confirmation of Senate are considered to be specific legislation. So if you're lobbying or working on nominations that require the confirmation of a legislative body, you need to track that and count it as lobbying. So there are exceptions to the lobbying definition and to that you don't have to count against your lobbying limit. Those are nonpartisan analysis, study, or research, requests for technical assistance, self-defense, examinations and discussions of broad social, economic, or similar problems, which is just kind of larger policy issue discussions. So if you need more, as I said before, we are like I said, I want to be able to talk about the lobbying limit. I don't know if we had a lot of time to talk about it, but if you have questions on it, you can call me later. And I'll give you my contact information here at the end. But, it's just important to point out that as a C3, you do have a limit on the amount of lobbying you can engage in. Two ways are available to measure that lobbying. The default way is called the no substantial part test or the insubstantial part test. It's a vague activities-based test. And then you can make an election to have a more concrete dollar-based expenditures test. And I know that it could get complicated, so we're going to just kind of run through that, but feel free to ask me later. Now we're going to get into elections and take some time to talk about election-related activity for public charities. I know, right now we're inching closer to the election. It's not that far away for all of us. And so it's just important to understand what you can and can't do as a public charity when you're involved in elections. And so first off, there's an absolute prohibition for public charities and private foundations for supporting or opposing candidates for public office. That's an absolute prohibition. But there are a lot of activities, nonpartisan activities that we can participate in. If you violate that prohibition, here's what can happen. You may receive a warning letter, or a excise tax on the foundation, public charity, and managers. And then finally, revocation of our tax-exempt status is also a possibility. It's the most extreme possibility if we are found to have violated that prohibition against supporting our opposing candidates. But the question is, what can we do? And first off, if we can't support our opposed candidates for public office, who's a candidate, right? So I'm going to try to get a little crowd involvement, make sure you're all paying attention. Who is Secretary Hillary Clinton a candidate for president? Just type your got a couple of answers here. Most people are saying no, not yet. I am sad to tell you, you are wrong. Under the IRS definition, which is a very broad definition, she is considered to be a candidate. She's a prospective candidate. So folks out there who are prospective candidates, although they have not declared yet, they may not have declared yet, they are still considered to be candidates. And the reason why is because they are prospective. So this is most important for C3s when there's some type of draft Hillary Clinton for president campaign. As a 501c3 public charity, you cannot get involved in a draft Hillary Clinton for president campaign or draft Chris Christie for president campaign. That's off limits for a C3, okay? We can't draft candidates for office. So this is prospective candidates. They count as well. What's public office? Public office is everything from your local dog catcher all the way up to President of the United States, right? School boards as well. And even those offices where it may be a nonpartisan office. Sometimes folks don't run affiliated with a party. Maybe it's a special election. Still, they are considered to be candidates for a public office. We can't support or oppose those folks. But there are activities that we can do, and as I said before, we've got issue advocacy, voter registration, voter education, and doing more. So as an issue advocate, you can stay active during an election. You don't have to be afraid. There are things that you should know. We'll talk about it in a second. Voter registration, you can do that. Voter education, we can do that. Candidate education, you can do that. It just needs to be nonpartisan. So the question is, for us, what is nonpartisan? What does that mean? Well, for the IRS, it depends on the facts and circumstances. It depends on the facts and circumstances. So the facts and circumstances test is what the IRS uses to determine whether or not a communication is nonpartisan. Now, for all intents and purposes, just to make it simple, it's essentially a smell test. So they look at a number of factors. So as you get closer to the election, the risk increases that it may look as if you're trying to intervene in an election. So we often look at these communications or activities on what we call a risk spectrum. So we apply this facts and circumstances test. It looks at things like whether or not an organization has been active on an issue for a number of years. What's their established record? Are you talking about an issue that is foreign to your organization, or an issue that is wrapped up that's a big part of an election or a candidate's platform, for example? And again, as you get closer to the election, that risk increases, okay? So this is kind of an example that I usually have a little more time to kind of to delve into, but basically, we just kind of take this example to show low, medium, and high risk communications. As you see, this communication doesn't mention a candidate, doesn't talk about voting for or against someone. It says just make your vote count for kids. So it's an issue related voting communication. And what we just tell groups is, make sure that if you do this, you take into account all of the facts and circumstances. And so, for example, if you are an organization that has never talked about making your vote count for kids, organization has just started, there's an election, 2 or 3 weeks away, and a big issue in the campaign is, one candidate has a platform on kids, the other has a platform on kids, and it's a big issue for the candidates, that could be a high-risk communication. But in most instances, if those facts and circumstances aren't present, it's probably a low to medium risk communication. Okay. So as we move forward, here you can continue your lobbying and advocacy campaigns. We can also criticize incumbents. 501c3 public charities can continue their criticism, especially when it's an issue-based criticism. You want to make sure that you focus on legislative issues or policy issues, that if you criticize incumbents, you're continuing an ongoing criticism. I like this example here because it lays out, it just uses the same picture. It's all about the legislators. It's not about their party or who they're affiliated with. They're Democrats and Republicans here. And it's not based on personal characteristics or fitness for office. So it's a nonpartisan communication. C3s can also do legislative scorecards. The IRS has given us safe harbors, however, that your communications need to fit into. And those safe harbors are if you send the communication to the public, then you need to make sure it's published regularly. It includes all legislators. You can't just pick out legislators. You cover what we call a broad range of issues, and we can have discussion later if you have questions on what a broad range of issues really means. And you have to avoid commentary, so you can't criticize specific legislators based on their positions. And the rules will change a little bit if you send it only to members. And members are defined as folks who contribute more than a nominal amount of money or time to your organization. And if that's present, if that happens, then you can cover a narrow range of issues, and you can also do commentary. So have questions, just feel free to ask or go to our website. Candidate education, you can put together a candidate briefing book. You can't do that specifically for one candidate. If a candidate asks you to help them put together their platform on how to increase funding for the arts, how to get kids involved in the arts, and if that's the case, then you need to make sure that you say, hey, listen, we've got information that we've developed on that. I can send it to you, but I cannot, help you put together a platform for your campaign as an employee at a public charity. I just can't do that, okay? But you can offer information that's already been gathered. Voter registration, we can do voter registration, get out the vote campaigns, but there are some rules. The first is to make sure that if you have volunteers who are going out into the community registering voters, getting out the vote, they know that they can't make reference to a party or candidate. They can't say, please vote for a specific senator or vote for this candidate or vote, you can't make a suggestion of which party to support. You must make the service available to everyone, and that's simple enough. And then you have to target for nonpartisan reasons. C3s can't target based on party or based on likely Democratic voters or swing districts, swing states. But you can target based on historically underrepresented groups. You can target the rising American electorate, so Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, or young people, college students, and the like. We can target based on those reasons. So here's a simple this just says your vote is your voice, fairly low risk. Here I've got vote pro-choice in red for C3s. The IRS has identified words like pro-choice, pro-life, liberal, and conservative when associated with voting. So when telling someone or trying to encourage folks to vote, if you say vote liberal or vote pro-choice, it's essentially telling them to vote for a specific party. So a C3 would not want to say that. Vote the environment, fairly low risk, medium risk. Vote, it's easy, very, very low risk. Communication for a C3. So those are just some examples. You can also do candidate questionnaires. You want to make sure that your candidate questionnaire is has unbiased questions that are open-ended, distributed to all the viable candidates, cover a broad range of issues. You cannot ask a candidate to pledge to support. If elected, will you support something? For a C3, that you cannot do that. When you publish the questionnaire as a voter guide, present it equally. Make sure that the formatting is good. A good thing to do is to make sure you have a word limit for the questionnaire. So when you publish those responses, it looks as if every candidate has an equal response to your questions. Disclaimers are always great. As you know, lawyers, we love disclaimers. And debates and forums, make sure that you cover, you have unbiased questions. Again, cover a broad range of issues, invite all viable candidates, have fair rules, impartial moderator to conduct the forum or debate. Give everyone an equal opportunity, and be sure not to give contextual favoritism to one candidate or show favoritism to one candidate over another. Sometimes you may want a candidate to appear in an appearance unrelated to their candidacy. In this case, for example, if you're giving a candidate some type of award or you want them to talk about their policy positions on an issue, you don't have to give equal opportunity to both candidates, but you do want to remind a candidate not to talk about their candidacy. Make sure that it doesn't coincide with the election, and also a disclaimer or a candidate or letter to the campaign. Now, in your individual capacity, of course, you can support or oppose candidates for public office. You can contribute. You can volunteer, but it needs to be in your personal time only. You can't use company resources to further the campaign of a candidate. And a great thing about arts organizations is that we have wonderful lists. Your list can be made available to candidates. However, every candidate should have the right to purchase a list if you choose to make it available to one. If another candidate who's from another party calls and says, I'd also like to purchase your list, you have to allow them to have that opportunity to purchase for fair market value and charge a customary fee. So always keep that in mind. Social networking, all these rules we've talked about apply to social networking as well. And then finally, I just wanted to make sure I give you my contact information. You can just reach me at Isaiah at Alliance for Justice or AFJ.org. Also, you can call me here at the office in D.C., 202-822-6070, and visit our website for more information. Thanks a lot.
That's great, Isaiah. Thanks for all that information. I have a question that, say if you're just to give a sense of the thresholds that's allowable for lobbying, if its organization is a $1 million organization, what's the kind of in general the threshold on what they could spend and invest on lobbying?
Well, it's first. So there are two ways to measure our lobbying, as I said before, and the insubstantial part test for organizations that have not made what we call the 501H election, right? The default way to measure your lobbying is based on your lobbying activity, and that's what you report on your Form 990. And so there are a list of activities that an organization would have to report. So volunteer activity that goes towards lobbying, rallies, donated goods and services, and expenditures that go towards lobbying have to be reported. And it's activities-based, and the IRS, under that test, that default test, hasn't given thresholds. Okay, we know from a case that 3 to 5% of your overall activity can be dedicated to lobbying under the insubstantial part test. If, however, you've made the 501H election, you have concrete dollar-based limits for lobbying. So if you are an organization that has spent that with annual expenditures of $500,000 or less, and the way you make the 501H election is you just submit a simple form, 5768. But if you have expenditures of $500,000 or less, you can spend 20% of your expenditures on lobbying. So it's not activities based, it's based on how much your organization spends in a year. For organizations that spend over $1 million or over $17 million, they are capped at $1 million to spend in lobbying if they make that 501H election. So as you move from $500,000 up to over $17 million, being capped at $1 million, those thresholds decrease, and they're actually very generous thresholds, and most organizations never even come close, especially C3s, come close to hitting their lobbying limit. So, and then that's kind of that's it.
Yeah, and it seems like for the bulk of our organizations that are spending obviously the vast amount of time and resources on our programs, our arts and cultural programs, the amount of lobbying efforts that we're doing far below that 20%, and certainly for most people under the 3 to 5%. So it's great for you to clarify what is the lobbying, and then, you know, if you were to compare it to all the other work that we're doing, most of us are far below that threshold.
Yeah, it's a very small percentage of your time or expenditures is probably going towards lobbying.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very small. Yeah.
You have do you have a chance? There's another person who asked if what 501c3s can do about advocating for increases in budget for the NEA or the MCC. I assume that falls just under the basic lobbying activities that you outlined before, right?
Yeah. You know, if you are working, you know, to, for example, get more money, if it's increases in the budget of those organizations, then that's not necessarily lobbying. That's not lobbying. If it's increasing the budget within that group. If it's increasing funding from the government to those organizations, then depending on how it's done, it could be lobbying. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so why don't we move on to our last speaker. Thanks so much, Isaiah. And as he touched upon, please contact him directly at the email or phone number that's here. He's graciously volunteered to help out anyone who has specific questions, because some folks may have specific cases that they're wanting some advice on. So I want to move to our last speaker, who's Jerry Wedge, who's the Executive Director of the Umbrella Center for Community Arts out in Concord, who's going to talk about their activities and what they've done around advocacy.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're on.
Great. Thanks again. I'm really excited to talk about the why and the how we advocate as kind of a case study, I guess, to the last presentation. For those of you who don't know us, the Umbrella is a community arts center. We serve Concord and the surrounding region. We were founded about 30 years ago by a group of what I now call advocate artists, intent on saving an old high school and building a community of varied artists. They named it Emerson Umbrella. Many of you may know us as that. They did that to acknowledge both the building that they were in and the kind of multiple disciplines under one roof. We've recently changed that name to simply The Umbrella, and you can see our new logo on the slide here. The organization has evolved over the years, and our present mission is not that different from the original. As it states on this slide, we are here to enrich lives and build a vibrant community through the arts. We do that through 5 programs. At our core are 56 working artists in the building, many with this work as their sole livelihood. Our arts education program serves about 1,200 students each year, both children and adults. And for the past 25 years, we've offered an arts and environment program to create awareness and appreciation of art and nature. We've got both an inside and an outside gallery, and we're building a performing arts program in our 350-seat theater. You can see that we have many different offerings and many ways for the community to get involved with the arts. When I took this position 2.5 years ago, I really didn't think that advocacy would end up playing such a strong role in my work. Then I met Matt from Mass Creative. He's helping us move toward integrating advocacy into just about everything we do. Like Kelly showed, I wanted to give you a sense of who our constituents are. Here's the list. They're as varied as our programs. You can see everyone from board members to legislators and all the varying artists in between. So the question of why do we advocate? We started out just talking about state funding for the arts as a way to increase awareness of the arts in general. As we talk about classes and gallery shows, we also started talking about Mass Cultural Council and its importance to our organization. One of our main goals is to kind of continually engage more people in the arts, and that means finding opportunities for people with varied interests to plug in where they feel comfortable. So, for instance, if you're not comfortable in a figure drawing class, but you love the arts in general, maybe you want to get involved in advocacy, and this gives you a place to do that. The third point here is that we all need additional resources, right? So when we first started, I thought, this is a lot of work for a few $100 in the MCC grant that we get. But now that we've been doing it for a couple of years, we look back, our grant has actually increased significantly over the last 2 cycles. It's probably the same for many of your organizations, which makes clear to me that the work we have been doing is paying off. And the last point here is it actually came as a bit of a surprise to me. And there's something wonderful about knowing that other organizations and other artists have similar needs and similar interests. Getting involved at the state level helps us put our goals and our organizational issues in perspective. And a recent example of this work is the work we did on Create the Vote last summer. We had really high ambitions of getting a lot of people there. It ended up being about 10 people from Concord that went to the candidates forum in Worcester, but we all had a blast. We met a lot of artists, we heard their stories, and we got to be up close with the candidates, and it ended up being a kind of way to get outside ourselves and see the bigger picture of the whole kind of environment over the arts in the state. Moving on to the how, I've outlined our primary means of advocacy here. I think that the most effective and most easily measurable method is face-to-face contact. If I personally ask someone to sign a petition or write a letter, A, they're more likely to say yes, and B, you get a pretty good idea if they're going to do it or not. The easy interactions are with the board and the staff and artists in the building, and actually our legislators. Our state rep is Corey Atkins, the chair of the Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development. So I know that she supports the arts, but I think it's still important for her to hear what her constituents need, and it's the same with our state senator. We're getting much better with social media and technology. We use Facebook mostly and are just starting to use Twitter and Instagram. They're really easy ways to broadcast a message. We send out e-blasts once or twice a week to promote our programs. And we also use blasts to send petitions or letter-writing campaigns. Mass Creative has done a great job so far in crafting letters for us to use. They're not always in our voice, so if we tweak them slightly, they tend to attract more responses. And the third bullet here, I put curtain speeches on the list basically because I had a conversation with Matt 2 years ago. Since we tend to be in front of audiences fairly regularly, showing them where the exits are or asking for their donations or asking them to come back for another event, we thought about how fun it would be when we got to the part about now it's time to turn off your cell phones, instead to say, would everyone now turn on your cell phones and text your state representative that you want more funding for the arts. My last point is events and publications. We publish a newsletter once a month, and I generally devote 2 of my messages per year to advocacy. Those are the letters, interestingly, that I get the greatest response. I guess I find that when you ask a group of artists for their opinion or an idea, they're generally pretty free to give it. And the events I'm referring to, in our case, are collaborations with other local arts organizations to organize coffees and invite representatives to come and talk. The Concord Museum held one a year ago last April on the Friday right after the marathon bombing. We had 50 constituents show up, and our Rep. Corey Atkins left with a resolve to not only vote for additional funding, but to really fight for it. And to me, that's advocacy at its best. All I've got, Matt.
Thank you, Jerry. That was great, and thanks for all that you've done to engage your board and your constituencies in advocacy. Especially you're in a key place with Representative Atkins, who's been one of the big champions for increased arts funding. It's the work that you've done with her has really helped her step up and be a champion. So that ends up our program here. I want to thank Kelly and Jerry for talking about what they've done locally on campaigns, and Isaiah for laying out the legal parameters of what we can do. I also want to thank the Bar Foundation for their support of this event and for all of the great advocacy that's been being done across the state. We have time for a couple of other questions if people want to type them in. And I just want to encourage everyone to engage in the Create the Vote campaign. Our staff will be following up with folks to talk to you about opportunities that we have to really publicize how important arts and culture is in our community, and to encourage our candidates to really develop bold and dynamic platforms on arts and culture. So thank you, everyone, for being on, and we look forward to working with you throughout the campaign and into next year as we really work together to build a more vibrant and connected Commonwealth. So thanks, everyone, for participating, and be on the lookout for more webinars and trainings over the next few months. Thank you.